Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. Canada is condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. At a Thursday press conference, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau outlined some of the sanctions the Kremlin will now face. Here's Fraser Needham with more.
The Prime Minister did not mince his words. Justin Trudeau says Russia's invasion of Ukraine is an attack on Canada, the world, and democracy itself.
Canada is unequivocal in our condemnation of Russia's unprovoked and unjustified attack on the sovereign, democratic state of Ukraine. President Putin's brazen disregard for international law, democracy, and human life are a massive threat to security and peace around the world.
After mobilizing on the Ukrainian border for weeks, Russian troops moved into the country early Thursday. In response, Trudeau says Canada will be imposing a number of economic penalties.
These sanctions will target 58 individuals and entities, including members of the Russian elite and their family members, as well as the Wagner Group and major Russian banks, among others. We will also sanction members of the Russian Security Council, including the Defense Minister, the Finance Minister, and the Justice Minister. In addition, effective immediately, we are ceasing all export permits for Russia and cancelling existing permits.
The Prime Minister would not specify if or when Canada would send troops into the conflict. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A Mi'kmaq chief is calling it a restorative justice double standard after Nova Scotia prosecutors announced the 25 people charged for ransacking a lobster pound and destroying a Mi'kmaq lobster catch while a Mi'kmaq fisher was stuck inside, well, they'll avoid criminal charges. Angel Moore reports.
This was the launch of the Atikamekw Treaty Fishery almost 2 years ago, a celebration that quickly ended because non-Indigenous fishermen reacted with violence. About 200 people surrounded a building that stored the Mi'kmaq lobster catch. They threatened to burn the building down while a Mi'kmaq harvester was inside. Crates of lobster were dumped on the ground. Earlier this month, 25 people faced charges of break-and-enter, unlawful assembly, and forcible entry. They will avoid court if they participate in a restorative justice.
The double standards are unreal. It's I don't even like using the word Canadian anymore. It's just...
Atikamekw Chief Mike Sack believes justice will not be served by going this route.
And then I just learned today that restorative justice is something that people are pushing for because they were trying to take another route with them and they were going to get off scot-free.
Not so, says senior Crown Attorney Brian Cox.
We retain the option to continue with the prosecution at a later date if the individuals who have been referred are unsuccessful with restorative justice.
Restorative justice is the best option, senior Crown Attorney Rob Kennedy says.
It invokes traditional restorative approaches and education, understanding, community building, and we felt that was the most important aspect of this case.
The Mi'kmaq fisherman who was surrounded inside the pound does not want to meet with the accused, but Kennedy says the process will continue.
It will involve members of the Indigenous community participating, particularly individuals that are involved in the fishery, elders from the community, as well as the Mi'kmaq Legal Support Network itself.
The executive director of the Mi'kmaq Legal Support Network, Paula Marshall, supports restorative justice for the 25 men.
This is a really event that happened, and though it may not be reflected necessarily in the charges that were laid, we want to make sure that there is proper education, that there is accountability, and that Mi'kmaq needs will be heard and met.
A hearing is scheduled for next September for an update of the restorative justice process. However, the Crown expects more time will be needed. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jibukduk, also known as Halifax.
Quebec has been served legal notice. 3 government ministries are named in a formal legal notice issued by the Atikamekw community of Wimotache, who say their ancestral lands are being destroyed by logging. Here's Lindsay Richardson with more.
Unconstitutional, self-serving, and superficial. These are a few of the terms tossed around by the Atikamekw Nation to describe the clear-cutting and logging activities on their ancestral territory. And on Thursday, one community took legal steps to try and force a delay. The Atikamekw community of Wimotashi held a presser to announce they've served 3 government ministries with a formal notice to suspend logging activities on their lands. A lawyer representing the community says it's an invitation to renegotiate, and if ignored by Quebec, could lead to a major lawsuit. Wimotashi says they're not against industry and are not taking aim at logging companies because they don't want to compromise future partnerships. But if the government doesn't hold to their promise and their duty to consult, Wimotashi and its surrounding sister communities say their Atikamekw traditions and way of life will be compromised. Because this was a late afternoon press conference, the 3 ministries named in the formal notice have not had time to respond on the record, but we'll have more on that as well as what's at stake coming up tomorrow. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Trois-Rivières, Quebec.
The Battleford's Tribal Council in Saskatchewan is expanding its search for graves connected to the St. Andre Indian Residential School near the town of Delmas. An initial search didn't turn up any graves, but records show 44 children died at the school, and survivors say there are indeed graves waiting to be found. APTN's Leanne Sanders has more.
The only grave that's been found so far was that of Henry Atikamekw. He was 14 when he died in 1910. His gravestone was found by a farmer 1 kilometer away from the ground-penetrating radar search conducted last year. Neil Sasakamus is the executive director of the Battleford's Agency Tribal Chiefs.
A child that's a mile from where they're supposed to be. And so now our evidence is taking us to a totally different location. So the search grid for Delmas isn't an immediate area anymore. It's going out to the Saskatchewan River.
Sasakamu says elders and residents in the area say that children's graves were moved, possibly twice.
Some might have been moved together, like say if they were in that area where they're building the Yellowhead Highway, there might have been movement there. There might have been movement just inside of the town of Delmas, but there's residences now there on top of on what they think there's. Some of them are underneath residences. We don't know. It's really a sad story.
The radar search is set to resume this spring. Sasakamu says it's incredibly challenging trying to get landowner approval and also trying to pinpoint where to look.
And when you start doing search grids in 2 miles and based on older history, I don't want to say they're needles in a haystack, but it's very difficult to find where those kids are.
Once the Delmas search is completed, the Battleford Agency will shift their focus to the Battleford Industrial School. That school was operated on the site of the former Territorial Government House in Battleford by the Anglican Church and later the Diocese of Saskatchewan. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Time for a quick break, and then we'll take you to the action of a military training that's underway in the NWT. Stick around. Welcome back. A long-running military operation is in full swing along the Beaufort Sea in the Northwest Territories. Our reporter Charlotte Moore Jacobs brings us all the action in the sky, under the water, and on the land.
This cold weather operators course is the first of its kind in the Arctic for regular and reserve force members, many of whom work, train, and operate nowhere near here.
Okay, left over right, right over left.
And they're learning from the best.
Sling over.
CWO Joel Pedersen is the only First Nations Chief Warrant Officer in the entire Canadian Armed Forces.
Kind of when you get to my rank, you don't get the opportunity to do this, to share with young soldiers. Where they're going to be operating is where we were last night, sleeping outside in the -40 with wind chill, and they may have to get up, put on their snowshoes, and be prepared to do their job, which is being out on the land.
More than 200 Canadian Armed Forces personnel are in the small Inuvialuit communities of Tuktoyaktuk and Inuvik.
Good evening, sir. Captain Fisher.
Participating in Operation Nanuk Nunaluvut. For 2 weeks, CAF will conduct activities such as long-range patrols and complex logistical supports to demonstrate their ability to sustain forces in the Arctic. They'll work with armed forces from the US, the UK, and even divers from France. At the commander's update brief, we meet important figures, like the Padre.
I've been going around since we came, trying to see where they are. And
Captain Augustine Esneru, a spiritual advisor who looks after the group's emotional and mental well-being.
If somebody needs an urgent attention, then I go direct to the CO, to the commanding officer, and say, hey, we have to pay attention to this soldier.
The Padre has lived and worked in Saugeen First Nation for 15 years.
That gave me an opportunity to educate people who haven't been, in the community. And it's very unfortunate that so many people, they only see the town, they don't see the people and who they are. They are people with wonderful, open hearts, so welcoming, so generous and down to earth.
So for Ranger 1, they've had a pretty hard time going up. They're facing some pretty nasty weather right now. And they will be.
The success of the operation is also reliant on joint patrols with the Canadian Rangers.
And they've learned the skills and the knowledge that's been passed on the same way it has been passed on through Indigenous culture and land and that aspect. So again, if we look through history, the Indigenous peoples have always helped out our military, and they continue to do so.
Pedersen, a member of Fond du Lac Dene First Nation and Mikisew Cree First Nation, says he's also learning from locals.
We're going to be going out for a night move, so we're going to pack up our tent, and they're going to put their snowshoes on and their rucksacks, and we're going to go for about a 10K walk, and then we're going to set up a tent. We've already talked to the ranger. We've asked him, what do you think the best place is?
Operation Nanuk wraps up February 28th. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Tuktoyaktuk.
Adult volunteers and high school students spend part of their weekend postering headshots of Indigenous people on buildings around Montreal. It's part of the Inside Out project. As Amelia Fournier reports, it showcases community concerns at an international level through public art.
Perfect. Look at you, you're a pro. Naguset is already a familiar face in Montreal's community activism circles, and these Indigenous faces will soon be familiar to Montrealers across the city. Students from Mind High School are helping Naguset and the project's volunteers put up posters for a project entitled Indigenous Forced Displacement. Naguset says this uprooting of Indigenous people is ongoing.
Because I work in and around the Cabot Square area, there's condos that are going up, there's a space in the park where there are a lot of Indigenous people. They're getting forced out. And it's a real shame, right? And where are they going to go?
But she also says the posters show Indigenous perseverance.
We all know how many Indigenous people used to make up Canada and what the percentage is now. But I also wanted to have a project where it shows that we are thriving, that we're still here.
Autumn Godwin is a volunteer with the project and a member of the Montreal Lake Cree Nation. She's making sure her daughter Clara learns about her heritage. Autumn says her daughter was happy to be on one of the posters.
She's super excited, she sees all the work that I'm doing and she sees how passionate I am about everything, so I think she really gets into it, and she's, it's something that we didn't have growing up, so I think for her, I get to see it through her eyes too, so it's pretty cool.
The photos were taken by 3 Indigenous photographers, Craig Commanda of the Algonquin Nation, Vicky McDonald, who is a Ojibwe, and Martin Loft, a Mohawk of Ganawage. Loft photographed mostly Ganawage residents.
I especially like photographing the elders, because when you see them and you hear their voice, and if you've known them for a while, it's kind of like it's like home.
Martin Loft says while Ganawage is an established, prosperous Indigenous community, Montrealers can forget that the Mohawk community is so nearby.
In a sense, we never left, and you wouldn't think that if you just got off the plane and came into downtown Montreal, or even for the people who live here, like where are the Mohawks? Where are the original inhabitants? Well, we're right there. And with this exhibition, it gives the opportunity to give it a face.
Despite the painful stories Indigenous displacement brings up, Naguset says the project was a positive experience.
Every photographer whose picture is here is thrilled to have it. The models are happy to be here. The people that are pasting are happy to be part of it. So, it's like you're the part of the problem or part of the solution, and this is part of the solution.
Emilia Fournier, APTN National News, Montreal.
February is Inuit Language Month, which is a big deal in Nunavut, where around 76% of the population can hold a conversation in Inuktitut. But to keep that language alive, Nunavut schools need Inuktitut books and Inuit authors. Our Kent Driscoll set out to meet one of those authors who publishes Inuit stories in English and Inuktitut.
In Nunavut schools, you can take 100% of your schooling in Inuktitut until grade 3. That's where Nadia Samertuk comes in. She began writing children's books while attending the Nunavut Teachers Education Program. She writes in English, and the books are published in English and Inuktitut.
When I was a student in the Nunavut Teacher Education Program, one of the summers during that program, I worked as a summer student with Inhabit Media, the publishing company. And so during one of the summers that I worked there, I came across a short paragraph from an Inuit legend that I was really drawn to, and so I thought about attempting to turn it into story form, like book form.
Samartuk now has 10 children's books in English and Inuktitut. Her stories have Inuit characters, take place in Nunavut, and feature things the kids will recognize. Her daughter sure knows what this is.
What's that girl inside?
Boy.
What's that boy inside?
Igloo.
What was that boy inside?
Igloo.
Samartuk's parents speak Inuktitut, but like many Inuit, she was raised as an English speaker. These books are part of how she reconnects with that Inuktitut part of her culture and shares it.
I've had to work on my fluency and practicing speaking in Inuktitut all of my life, and I'm still practicing. So I don't consider myself fluent, but for younger children, I think it's very important that they don't miss out on that opportunity to learn as much of our language as they can, especially being, younger.
Keeping a young child's attention is half the battle when teaching. Samartuk sees the focus go up with the students when they see familiar stories and images.
Been very excited because they're like, oh, I know that story. My mom used to tell me that when I was younger, or my Ananitsak wrote that story, sort of thing. So yeah, you can see a lot of connection between the students or children and the stories.
Inuktitut does well in Nunavut, but it is on the decline. The 2016 census showed that 65% of Nunavummiut say Inuktitut is their mother tongue. That was a drop from the previous census, and the language data from the most recent census is still pending. Getting every early reader matters, and this is how you do it. One reader at a time. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
Time for another quick break, and then the connection between computer coding and reconciliation. Stick around. Welcome back. As Yukon's opioid and addictions crisis continues to impact the territory, performers in an upcoming music show are hoping their voices will change the way people view the issue. And as Eric Connors tells us, they're hoping their performance will help addicts and people struggling with their mental health.
Yudi Mercady is one half of hip-hop duo Vision Quest. The Vuntut Gwich'in citizen is practicing a song he'll be rapping for Crush the Crisis, an online show to honor the lives lost to Yukon's opioid and addictions crisis.
It's a major issue and it's scary, right? You don't know. People are going through whatever, so they start using, but then they could just drop.
According to the territory's chief coroner, 8 people have died from drug overdose in the first 6 weeks of this year. At least 2 were from Mercady's community of Old Crow.
You can see the struggle in the community, like as is right now. Like you can see people hurting. Put a smile on during the day, but at night they're hurting in their home. You know that.
I found my light at the end of the tunnel. I constantly struggle, which made me scared to be humble. I put a chip on my shoulder.
Mercady hopes his performance will draw attention to the Ogilvy Creative House in Whitehorse, where the show will be live streamed. The space is free to use for young creatives and has its own recording studio. Mercady says making music can be healing for young people struggling.
People have their own outlets, you know, but I like to write. And some kids like to write too. This would be a great place for them to come.
Dalton Moore, a rapper who performs as Mob Diggity, is also lending his voice to the issue. The Champaign and Ajax citizen says addiction is often rooted in intergenerational trauma from residential school, something he's experienced firsthand.
This music has definitely helped me paint a clearer picture of what we need as a people and what we need to actually better our mental health.
Much of the music he'll rap has an underlying message about addictions and mental health, which he hopes will help people who are struggling.
I hope it can really help a lot of people with what I have to say in the subject matter in my lyrics, because my lyrics are definitely the most important thing to me.
So feed out the weather just to measure the cost, and honestly, a look in the
Mercady hopes people watching will be inspired to reach out if they need help.
So if we could do a little part to make a big change, then that's what we're going to do.
The show's organizers have also worked a message about the Yukon Supervised Consumption site into their show. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Going to check out some Mob Diggity. A Winnipeg-based Anishinaabe educator is helping lead the charge for teaching students the basics of computer coding while engaging in discussions about reconciliation. Your Voice is Power is a national competition for middle and high school students designed to teach fundamentals of computer science, entrepreneurship, and social justice. Students will create their own original songs using music from 3 Indigenous artists. They'll use EarSketch, a free online code editor available in English, French, Anishinaabemowin, and Inuktitut. Students will learn how music, computer science, and entrepreneurship can be tools to fight for social justice. The competition runs through May 31st. 2 winners will receive $5,000 for college or to start a business, and 1 teacher will receive $1,000.
While students are engaging through this program and learning how to code, they're also learning about some of the injustices that Indigenous communities have faced here in Canada. So we talk about residential schools, we talk about the 60s scoop, and ultimately students learn about the 94 calls to action, and they get to choose one that inspires them or that they want to advocate for, and that's something that they get to write their original song around.
Sounds pretty cool. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this weekend. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.